that the painters at the painter's command to express his feelings. This is by Henri Matisse. This is a famous artist, and I agree with this definition very much. Now, what are the elements? The definition of composition is that composition in the art is the art of arranging in a decorative manner the different composition elements that the painters at the painter's command to express his feelings. This is by Henri Matisse. This is a famous artist, and I agree with this definition very much. Now, what are the elements? The definition of composition is that composition in the art is the art of arranging in a decorative manner the different composition elements that the painters at the painter's command to express his feelings. This is by Henri Matisse. This is a famous artist, and I agree with this definition very much. Now, what are the elements that we possess that we can play with as artists, but in this case as marketeers? So, of course, lines and shapes, texture, value. So value, I have to say, is the most important topic of the day, in fact. So what does value mean? It means how dark or light the color is. So if we're talking different shades of gray, this is different values of black and white, in fact. Then we will talk about color itself, form, and space. Now, space is also particularly important, and when we talk composition, we will talk about it a little bit later. In detail, because it's also one of the most important concepts that we have to understand today. So, what are the different principles of composition that we need to be aware of? Firstly, unity. So, when we talk about composition, everything on your space can be brochure, it can be a painting, depends on what you're working with, right? But all of it has to make sense, and nothing has to stick out in the wrong way. Secondly, balance. For example, if we have a composition where on one side the slide or the brochure is very, very busy, and then on the other side it's empty, that's an example of bad balance in your composition. And this actually I see a lot in marketing materials. So you have a heavy top and nothing in the bottom at all. That's wrong. Then movement. So there are different types of ways that we can create movement in our composition. A lot of that for us, for marketeers, has to do with lines, because that's what we will use, lines and logos and some pictures, right? So lines are particularly important because they lead the viewer's eye through the composition. Then rhythm. Rhythm is basically a sequence of similar shapes that lead the eye through the composition. Example would be, if you have ever seen a picture with alley of trees, this is the rhythm. So you have similar shapes, the trees, that go through the whole composition from the beginning to the end, from foreground to background. And this is what you will see, that is rhythm. Now, important, and this is the most important also, is focus. So for us, for marketeers, we want the person who is looking at the material to see something first and to stick with it, something they have to really remember. And we will look today at different options how to do this, but this focus, the focal point, very important. Then contrast. So contrast is depending on, basically it's the contrast between different elements. And it can not only be just how bright or dark the element is, it can also be different color contrast. It can be different shape contrast. It can be different types of contrast. Finally, pattern. This is repetition of certain shapes, values, colors through the composition. This would be very common in mandalas, if you know what mandala is. It's a round or square ornament, basically, pattern. So that's what we're talking about here. And finally, proportion. So proportion is about, does this make sense to the eye or not? Example, let's imagine I'm painting a picture and I have a person in that picture, and next to the person I have a small mouse. That makes sense. Now I made a mistake and I made a very big mouse. So they are similar size with the human. If that was not my intention, this is clearly wrong proportion. That's wrong. So this is what proportion means here, okay? So these are the principles. Now we will go into some of the really important rules. So firstly, the most important rule of composition is the rule of thirds. It is also sometimes called golden ratio. So what that is, you can see here on the picture that I have divided my space in 3 different parts. And the crossing of these 3 parts is in fact where ideally my focus should be. So the most important thing that I want to highlight should go somewhere on the crossing of these thirds of the lines that divide our space into 3. It should not go in the middle. Often we do exactly that. Artistically, it's considered that it's very boring to the eye. And because of that, we should avoid doing that. We should not put our most important elements in the middle. The composition has to be split in thirds, and on the crossing of those thirds, that's where we place. So we have alternatives, right? But it has to be a little bit to one side or another, or the eye will very quickly go and wander. So you will not capture the user's attention, the person's attention. And for marketing, actually, this is a mistake a lot of people do. Now, below, you see a painting of one of my favorite artists, Salvador Dali, and you can see that he's actually following this rule of thirds. So his composition is divided into these thirds, okay? Now, second really important and very simple rule is that we should try and avoid the even numbers of elements. So if I'm painting 3 apples, that's okay. If I'm painting 4, I would tend to divide them more or less equally through the composition. And that, as we just heard, creates the symmetry which is boring to the eye. So it should not be there. So better paint 5 or 3. And it's the same in marketing. So if you are putting different elements, try to make an even number of pictures in the presentation, for example, right? On the slide, like here, if you look at my own presentation, I have 3 elements on one side, and that's because I did not want it to be very symmetrical. So, very simple rule, but important. And finally, this is really important, and everybody forgets about it, is the positive and negative space. So here I have to explain what this means. Now, when we talk about positive space, this means my content, basically, the subject of the picture, the most important things in the picture. In marketing, same thing. So my content is basically what? My words, my pictures, what I'm trying to make my marketing material with, okay? But there is also negative space. Negative space is the space around that. And it is important. And here I'm illustrating to you the point. Basically, same picture in black and white. And you can see, in one case, if you look at it, you see a vase. In another case, you see faces. In fact, this is a play on negative and positive space. So the shape of the negative space is equally important as that of the positive space. So your content, if you place it correctly, should also create a negative space that looks acceptable to the eye. Something to pay attention to, okay? Now, one of the classic things to note is, in fact, that yin yang is a play on negative and positive space. And that's really coming from very, very long time. So people who created all these concepts, the artists, they have known this for many, many years. Now, having said that, we will now go through types of composition. There are many. Some you will see more frequently than others. One of the most typical ways to create a composition is a pyramid, so a triangular composition. It would be, for example, mountain. If you have a painting of a mountain, that would most likely be a triangular composition. Diagonal is another very typical one. We have already seen one when I was showing you the painting from Salvador Dali, and we will see more of those. And this one is actually pretty good for web design or for brochures. You can use the diagonal concept quite successfully. Then you have a cross. That's also very common. Everybody understands what that is. And then L shape. So L shape is actually quite common in common web design. You will have a heavier top, and then you will have something to one side, according to the rule of thirds that we have covered. And the rest of the space will be less busy, more negative space than positive. Yeah. Then also you have here a composition which is an S shape. So this one, if you have seen ever a painting of a road going through the field, most likely that was an S composition, and we will see an example later. And then circular composition. So circular composition is less popular now. The reason is because it's quite difficult to make it according to the rule of thirds, a little bit uneven. In the past, though, it was very much used for icons and religious painting. And many of the old masters, they used that kind of composition. Scales. So this means, again, we're talking balance, right? So we have a heavier one side of the picture, a bit less heavy another one, and at the top something else to balance out the space. That would be scales. And then steel yard is very similar to L shape, pretty much the same idea. Finally, radiating lines. So radiating lines means that you have focal point and then lines radiating off of it. And that creates a composition which is kind of with this radiating lines where you have smaller accents located across the semicircle, okay? So these are the types of composition. There are others as well that are totally valid, but these are the most common ones. Now let's see how that looks in practice. So here I have put for you a number of different paintings and photos, and we will now look at them and see the different types of composition. So first one I wanted you to pay attention to is the one that you will all recognize, that is Mona Lisa. So Mona Lisa is in fact a triangular composition, if you look at it. You will notice that she is the most prominent shape, a little bit to the side, according to the rule of thirds pretty much, and it's a triangular shape. So that is classic triangular composition. Then we will look at this one. So we said diagonal, right? This is actually one of my paintings. So here, this is what you see. The focal point is the car here, and the composition goes according to diagonal to create more space. Then we said S composition. I was mentioning the road through the fields. Here we have a river through the fields, but same idea. You see how it goes a bit like an S shape. Then we were discussing the rule of thirds, and we said that the emphasis should be put somewhere along the crossing of the line of the thirds. Here, this big wave is an example of that, and it's a little bit like an L composition. So you see it goes, we have the C here, and then it goes up. So that's an L composition. Same here, we have an example of Van Gogh, who's also one of my favorite painters. And you can see here, similar idea. So you have more busy space here, and then the negative space in the background. Finally, again, diagonal. This photo, it's very classic. So clearly we can see that the emphasis of the picture is the bench, right? And we see how the diagonal lines are leading to it. And so this is an example of very good composition. So we have the rule of thirds as followed, right? So if we divide the picture in thirds, the bench will be on the crossing of those lines. We have a clear focal point because it's much darker than everything else in the picture. And we have the lines leading the eye to that focal point. So that's an example of a good composition. I hope this is clear. I will leave some time for the questions later. In the meantime, let's move on to the color theory. So, color theory, let's begin with understanding of some definitions. Value, hue, and saturation. So what are those? Value, we discussed briefly in the beginning. Value is how dark or light the color is. And here on my slide, you can see an example of different values of color red. So starting from very light color, going dark, 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 dark. And then we have saturation. So saturation means the purity of color, how intense the color is. So here again, you have an example. You have a really bright red, very vivid, very bright. It sticks out. And then we dilute it and it becomes less and less saturated. That's what saturation is. Finally, hue. Hue is basically the color itself. It's how does this color look? Is it a red color? Is it a yellow color? Or is it a blue color? This is what the hue tells you. So these are the three important definitions, right? Again, value, how dark or light. Saturation, how bright or kind of subtle is the color. And then hue is the color itself, meaning what shade of color is this. Now, there are only three colors that are called prime colors. Prime colors means the colors that cannot be mixed with others. So these are only three, and they are red, yellow, and blue. These are the primary colors. Everything else is either secondary or tertiary, meaning you can mix the primary colors to get the secondary or the tertiary color. Example, so let's say I mix blue, one of the primary colors, with red, another primary color. What I will get is violet, that's a secondary color. And then if I mix my violet with blue, I will get blue-violet, tertiary color. So you see the logic, right? Again, red with yellow will give me, red with yellow will give me orange, blue with yellow will give me green, etc. So most importantly, three colors, yellow, red, and blue. They cannot be mixed. The rest can be. Then we have a definition of warm and cold colors. So traditionally, the idea is that the red, the orange, and the yellow is warm colors. Blue and green are considered cold, violet as well. So this, in theory, most simplistically explains to you what cold or warm is. But the thing is that you can have different shades of one color, and it can be very relative. For example, I can have a warm blue in comparison to more cold blue. And I have here an example of green, right? So pure green, it's considered a cold color, okay. But if I add orange to it, it will be a little bit less bright, but it will be a warm color. Warmer compared to the traditional green. If I add blue, that will give me the opposite effect. I will have a colder color than the original green. So this is a relative definition of warm and cold. Now, let's talk a little bit about value. So we said this is really important. Every color has value, not only gray, yeah, but any color. Red or green or orange, whatever the color, it can be lighter or darker. And that's what value describes. I give you here a simple example of black and white color scheme to explain exactly what value is. So we start from 0 value, white, and we go up to 10, which is black. And this is actually the most important tool that in the past people had to play with, because different colors were mixed later. The first paintings were drawings on the walls of the caves, right? And they only had coal to draw with, so black and white, right? Now, with that, you have two types of composition. Low-key, which is darker kind of colors. So that, again, that cannot be not only black and white, but it can be different colors, but dark colors. So that would be called low-key, and that creates a kind of a sense of drama and mystery. Or you can have lighter color scheme, and you have both examples here, right? So lighter color scheme will be called high-key, and this one will create a kind of sense of happiness and lightness, and it's also, in a sense, perceived color light is this kind of understanding. So depending on what you want to convey, you want to use this or that. For example, in my own marketing, I used a lot of high key colors and color schemes. Why? Because the product that I had to market, it was medical device. So very important to convey the concept of cleanliness, right? And of course, these lighter colors, they are associated with cleanliness. So I would use a lot of that. Now, let's go into the color schemes. So the most simple way of creating color harmony in your visual is using monochromatic color scheme. The most basic monochromatic color scheme is black and white. And we have seen that in photos. This can work great. There are beautiful photos that are in black and white. We have seen an example earlier. But it can also be other color. For example, I'm Russian, and in our culture, we have traditional painting like this, which is blue and white. And this is a monochromatic color scheme. So I'm not using anything but blue color. Still, it looks beautiful. Or it can be like here, yellow-brown. That is also an example of monochromatic composition. So we can use those different colors with different shades, different values to create a beautiful picture painting. But there are more, of course, color schemes. So another traditional way is to say, well, we have the color wheel, right? So yellow, blue, red, and we can mix those. Now, one of the ways of creating a good color palette that will be harmonious is to use analogous colors. So analogous colors means they are close on the color wheel. So for example, if I want to again take green, yellow-green, and blue-green, that would be harmonious because all of these colors, they contain some green in it, right? So that will be a nice color palette that will be harmonious. Same, we can say it can be yellow, green, and green. All of them will contain some amount of yellow. So again, this is harmonious to the eye. This looks good. But finally, the most productive, I would say, color scheme is complementary colors. Why I'm saying that is because we talked about contrast earlier, right? And about focus. So one of the ways to create focus is with colors. Example I'm giving you here. So I have selected a complementary color scheme, which is orange, red, and violet, red color, 3 colors that are adjacent on the color wheel. I take one color, which is the opposite. In this case, this is green. So if I create my picture in those orange, red, and violet, red color, and I want to create a focal point, it would be a very good idea for me to use green. It will immediately attract my eye, and I will really look at that element. So for marketing materials as well, that's important. This contrast, it can be created with color. It can be created with color temperature. So if I'm using here again, warm color scheme, right? And I'm putting an emphasis of cold color, green, that will stick out naturally. Same I can do with value. For example, these colors I have made kind of lighter, and then I put a dark green. That would again create focus. So this is the play on color that you can do, and also using value is important. So that is the kind of color schemes we use. We discussed 3 color schemes, right? Monochromatic, which is using one color only. Analogous, similar colors on the same side of the color wheel. And then finally complementary, which is similar colors plus one color that's opposite to them. So this is the main concepts of color theory. Now let's see some examples. So I have here an example for you of almost monochromatic color scheme, orange reds, you see here. We were talking that you can create emphasis. So here the emphasis is created by this diluted but colder color. So the whole color scheme is very, very warm, but we have a cold color and it attracts attention, right? Now, here we have an analogous color scheme. Yellow, yellow-green, and blue-green colors, they create in this painting a color harmony with analogous color scheme. And then these three, this is the complementary color schemes. So here we have blue-greenish environment with focus on orangey flowers. Those are the opposites, and the eye immediately goes to the flowers, right? Here we have an example of, I was telling you, diagonal composition, right? With contrast. So here we have orange, here we have violet blue. These are the opposite colors. So again, complementary color scheme. And finally here with the pairs, I really wanted to put this one because it shows you the exact classical contrasts. So you have red against the green, two opposites. You have orange with blue, another opposite. And then you have orange and violet. These are all yellow and violet. These are the opposite colors. So these are the three examples of the complementary color scheme. Okay. With that, I will open to questions. Thank you. I will give it a couple of minutes if you want to ask any questions. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed the session. You have registered, so I have your emails. I will send you the presentation. And please feel free to use it and to refer to it when you need some help with your marketing material. Thank you. So I have one question here. Is it possible to use different colors, not opposite? I mean, yes, then you would use an analogous color scheme.